Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're uncovering a wild reality. Living organisms function just like incredibly sophisticated, automated factories. We often take for granted the sheer mind-blowing complexity happening beneath the surface of every living thing. So, we're going to break down the highly organized systems that keep this biological factory running flawlessly, day in and day out.
It raises a really fascinating question, right? How do we know a sleeping animal or a perfectly still plant is actually alive? Well, the secret is invisible, constant molecular movement. See, because of the environment, the highly ordered structures of living things are constantly at risk of falling apart. It's called entropy. To fight off that structural breakdown, organisms literally have to continuously move molecules around to repair and maintain themselves.
To understand how this all works, we're going to tour the 4 essential departments of our biological factory: the spark of life, nutrition, respiration, transportation, and finally, excretion.
Starting off with Section 1, the spark of life, fighting the breakdown of order. It all begins with the reality that just staying alive and fighting off physical breakdown requires a massive, constant influx of energy. Even when you're just sitting there quietly or fast asleep, this invisible maintenance job has to keep going. And that constant upkeep is the very definition of a life process.
Which naturally brings us to Section 2, nutrition, fueling the machine and sourcing raw materials. Because that vital energy has to come from the outside environment, organisms need a robust, foolproof way to import this external energy source, which we call food, right into the body.
What's super interesting here is the core difference in supply chain strategies. Autotrophs, like green plants, are the ultimate self-starters. They manufacture their own parts using photosynthesis, taking carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight to build carbohydrates. But heterotrophs, like us humans, we rely on a totally different strategy. We basically have to dismantle what others have made by taking in complex substances and breaking them down into simpler, usable forms. Think of the human digestive tract as a highly regulated disassembly line. It starts right in the mouth with physical crushing and chemical wetting. Then, peristaltic movements push the food down into the stomach, where hydrochloric acid creates an intensely acidic environment for initial protein digestion. Finally, everything enters the longest section, the small intestine. This is where digestion is completed, and nutrients are absorbed through tiny finger-like projections called villi, right before the large intestine reclaims the water. To actually pull this off, our factory employs highly specialized chemical workers called enzymes. Salivary amylase kicks things off by breaking down complex starches into sugars right in your mouth. Then pepsin tackles proteins in the harsh, acidic environment of the stomach. Later on, the pancreas deploys trypsin to finish off proteins and lipase to break down emulsified fats in the small intestine. It's a perfectly coordinated chemical dismantling process.
When you compare the two, it's a pretty stark contrast. Humans require a heavy-duty, mobile digestive tube to go around stealing nutrients from others, while plants just run a quiet, stationary, solar-powered synthesis lab. They open up tiny stomatal pores on their leaves to take in carbon dioxide, pull up soil minerals through their roots, and use green chlorophyll to trap sunlight. 2 completely different factory setups achieving the exact same goal.
Okay, moving to Section 3, respiration, unlocking the energy to generate power from molecular movement. Once we've secured the raw materials, we need to oxidize them to build the universal biological battery, a molecule called ATP. Without ATP, all those vital molecular movements we just talked about would simply grind to a halt.
Ever wonder why your muscles absolutely scream with cramps during an intense sprint? It literally comes down to oxygen. In all living things, glucose gets broken down into pyruvate. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen inside the mitochondria to completely break this down, releasing a massive amount of energy. But running without oxygen, the anaerobic pathway, yields way less energy. In your muscle cells during a sudden sprint, this lack of oxygen causes a rapid buildup of lactic acid, and that is exactly why you get those painful cramps.
So to keep that aerobic energy flowing, we need a massive air intake system. The pathway starts at the nostrils, where air is filtered. It travels down the trachea, which is intelligently held open by rings of cartilage, and then enters the lungs. Here, the tubes branch out into millions of microscopic balloon-like structures called alveoli. This brilliant design maximizes delicate surface area for rapid gas exchange into the blood, all while keeping that fragile surface completely protected deep inside your chest.
All right, Section 4, transportation, the supply chain, moving resources and removing exhaust. Because once you unlock that energy, you can't just leave your fuel and oxygen sitting at the loading dock. They have to be delivered to every single cell in the entire organism.
So you might be wondering, what if our factory just relied entirely on simple diffusion to move supplies? Well, for single-celled organisms, simple diffusion, where molecules naturally drift from high to low concentration, is completely fine. Their whole body is touching the environment. But as body size increases and designs get more complex, relying on supplies to just slowly drift from cell to cell becomes a total logistical nightmare. Check this out. If humans relied on simple diffusion, you would have to wait 3 years just for a single breath of oxygen to travel from your lungs down to your toes. 3 years! This staggering fact perfectly demonstrates why multicellular humans need an active, high-speed delivery network. We use a respiratory pigment called hemoglobin packed inside our red blood cells, which literally grabs on oxygen and races it around the body.
To beat that 3-year wait, our biological pump aims for a gold standard pressure of 120/80. That measures the systolic and diastolic pressure in millimeters of mercury. Your heart is a muscular, 4-chambered pump driving a double circulation system. One side pushes deoxygenated blood to the lungs, while the other side simultaneously blasts the newly oxygenated blood out to the rest of the body through thick, highly elastic arteries. But any engineer will tell you that a high-pressure system is incredibly efficient, yet highly vulnerable. A single leak or injury could cause a catastrophic pressure drop and a fatal loss of vital resources, which is exactly why the body comes equipped with an incredible, built-in automated maintenance crew.
This is where our automated emergency crew steps in. Platelet cells are constantly patrolling the bloodstream, and the second they detect a leak, they rush in to clot and plug the hole. Meanwhile, we also have a secondary backup system called the lymphatic system. It collects excess tissue fluid that escapes from our capillaries, drains it back into the main veins, and even serves as a dedicated transport highway for digested fats from the intestine.
What's wild is how plants solve this exact same transport nightmare, but without a beating heart. Humans use closed vessels, but plants use 2 independent tube systems. The xylem relies on the physical suction created by water evaporating from leaves, a process called transpiration, to pull water all the way up from the roots. Meanwhile, the phloem uses active ATP energy to push synthesized food from the leaves to wherever the plant needs it, which is known as translocation.
Which brings us to our final department, Section 5, Excretion, Waste Management, and Discarding Dangerous Byproducts. When our cells generate energy and synthesize proteins, they create nitrogenous byproducts like urea and uric acid. And if left to build up, these are actively toxic to the system. The absolute star of this cleanup operation is the kidneys, acting as a hyper-selective filtration plant. Blood packed with waste enters via the renal artery. Inside, millions of tiny capillary clusters called nephrons act as the main filters, stripping the blood of water, salts, glucose, and toxic waste. As this initial fluid travels down the tubes, the kidneys selectively reabsorb the useful glucose and water back into the body, isolating the toxic waste into urine to be stored in the bladder.
The sheer scale of this is literally mind-boggling. Your microscopic nephrons filter 180 liters of initial fluid from your blood every single day. 180 liters. Yet because the selective reabsorption process is so masterfully efficient, we only actually excrete about 1 to 2 liters of urine a day. The rest of that essential water and material is safely returned to circulation.
Plants, on the other hand, take a much slower approach. Since they don't have that rapid metabolic turnover, they don't need dedicated, high-flow organs like kidneys. They quite literally shed their waste by letting old leaves fall to the ground, locking toxins away inside cellular vacuoles, or storing them as resins and gums in old dead wood.
We're going to wrap up this explainer with a thought that really twists your perspective. The very oxygen that acts as the vital, life-giving fuel for our animal factory is simply the discarded toxic waste product of the plant factory's photosynthesis. It brilliantly illustrates how life processes interlock to form this grand, interconnected system. It makes you wonder, if our vital breath is just another organism's trash, what other invisible loops of life are happening right under our noses?